We tend to draw this really clear line, right? Over here, you've got history, facts, things written down. And over there, you've got myths, just stories. But what if that entire line is just completely wrong? I mean, what if some of the oldest stories in the world, the ones we usually brush off as folklore or Dreamtime legends, weren't just simple metaphors? What if they're actually eyewitness accounts, incredibly precise records of real, world-changing events passed down from one generation to the next? Yeah, you heard that right. We are talking about actual memories from the end of the last ice age, all preserved perfectly in a library that doesn't have a single book. So let's dive into the incredible world of Aboriginal Australian oral traditions. For decades, these stories were treated as pure mythology. But now, a growing body of research is showing they contain something absolutely astonishing: specific, verifiable geological data. And look, these aren't vague, once-upon-a-time tales. We're talking about super detailed accounts of coastlines being completely swallowed by the ocean, of islands being formed when the sea literally cut off parts of the mainland, and of massive volcanic eruptions that changed the face of the Earth. And the details, they're just eerily accurate. Okay, so you're probably thinking, how can we possibly be so sure about this? Well, this is where it gets really cool. This is where modern science gets to shake hands with ancient memory. We can now take these stories and compare them directly to the geological record. First, let's look at the story. All up and down Australia's enormous coastline, different Aboriginal groups have traditions that describe a time when the sea level was much, much lower. They talk about a coastline that used to be way further out, and they describe exactly how the ocean slowly crept in and drowned the lands where their ancestors lived and hunted. And here's the scientific match. Geologists know for a fact that as the last ice age ended, the world's massive ice sheets melted, causing a dramatic rise in sea levels. And check out these dates. The process really kicked off around 13,000 years ago and stabilized around 7,000 years ago, which is exactly the time frame described in the oral traditions. These aren't myths, they are memories.
But believe it or not, it gets even older, a lot older. Let's take another example. The oral traditions of the Gunditjmara people describe this cataclysmic eruption, a river of fire, they say, that created the very specific landscape they live in today.
Geologists have dated the Budj Bim volcano eruption, the exact event described in their stories, to 37,000 years ago. Let that number just sink in for a minute. That's an accurate historical account, passed down by word of mouth for nearly 400 generations. It's just mind-blowing. So this immediately brings up a huge question, right? How? How could anybody possibly transmit information that accurately for that long without writing a single word down? I mean, it seems to defy everything we think we know about memory. Well, the answer is that these were never just casual campfire stories. Aboriginal Australian cultures developed these highly sophisticated, purpose-built systems for accuracy. They used the landscape itself and song lines as mnemonic devices, basically encoding information into the world around them. This knowledge was then drilled in through ceremonial, word-for-word repetition. And on top of that, there were powerful cultural rules, sanctions even, against changing a single detail. It was a system designed for permanence. And this really forces us to rethink our assumptions. We often see writing as the superior method, right? But while a book can burn or a library can crumble, a story that's embedded in a culture and a landscape is incredibly resilient. This wasn't a primitive system, it was a different one, with its own unique and powerful strengths. So the implications here, they go far beyond Australia. This evidence challenges the very foundation of how we define and study human history itself. What it really reveals is a deep-seated literacy bias in how we think. It's this tendency we have to automatically see written records as more reliable, more complex, or just plain better than spoken ones. We assume that if it's not written down, it must be unreliable or wrong. Which brings us to a pretty fundamental, maybe even uncomfortable question. Have we been standing in front of these vast libraries of human knowledge, full of eyewitness accounts from our deepest past, and just ignoring them because they weren't written on paper? Because once you accept this as possible, you start seeing potential connections everywhere. Could Homer's Iliad actually contain accurate details of Bronze Age warfare? Are the Norse sagas more than just fantasies? Maybe they're based on real logs of voyages to North America?
And what about those countless flood myths from cultures all over the globe? Could they all be pointing back to a shared memory of the post-Ice Age sea level rise?
And really, that's the thought I want to leave you with. This isn't just about geology or ancient Australia. It's about recognizing that humanity has had brilliant ways of recording its own story for tens of thousands of years. The real question is, how much of that story are we finally ready to listen to?